So Deep and I, we just came from another very important event that took place in Tallinn today. So today we opened the regional hub for Diana in Tallinn. That is the best and most forward-looking and most cutting-edge defense and dual-use accelerator in Tallinn. And Deep is actually sharing this. So, and we took a car here, and we decided that we're going to speak a little bit about the importance of the defense tech, dual use, how it will emerge in the upcoming years, and secondly, how does it contribute to deterrence? So Easter promised that if we have a technological supremacy, our technology is better, our access to talent is better, then Russia is deterred by the fact of that. Or is there something else that we need? Deep, so you want to start our chat?
Yeah, sure. I mean, hopefully you can hear me okay. Sorry, that was quite loud. The mics are very, very sensitive. It was a very fascinating discussion that we just heard on the stage a minute ago. I think it picked up a lot of the points that we're probably going to pick up in this discussion as well. But for those of you who don't know, then Diana is this dual-use accelerator program with the idea that, in fact, what we need to be doing is doing what you heard the CEO or the founder from Helsing saying, is to prepare a technology environment and a technology ecosystem for the Alliance that means that we are in the best shape possible to be able to solve not just the problems of today that we face in defense and security, but also the problems that are going to manifest themselves in the future. So this is really about making sure that we are one step ahead and we are trying to deliver against that mission that you just were listening to or hearing about in the talk just a short while ago. And we can dive into the reasons why dual use is sensible. There are business reasons why it's sensible, but there are also very important defense narrative reasons why it's important as well. But maybe we'll get into that in a second.
Yeah, I will pick up it from here. Well, I come from defense sector. I've been here for almost 20 years. And just looking around in the last 2 years, I've realized that we also need to some things better. And one of the things that we need to start with is the better mission statement. In defense, in attracting people to defense, but also in defense industry. I think the mission statement of going and killing people, destroying cities, blowing up things, well, it's not a thing people usually want to associate themselves with. This is a little bit of psychopathic worldview where, I mean, it's not millions, it's probably business for a few thousand people. And if you think of that, it comes out as a paradox, but it actually isn't. I think every industry faces the same issue in their mission statement. If you think of Coca-Cola, their mission is not, breaking your teeth and making all the children fat around the world. Their mission is selling freedom and, well, whatever else they say, family connections. So they're extremely clever in that. And if I think of the defense from the same angle, then this is also extremely simple for us. And we have all felt it in the last 2 years when we think of Ukraine. The mission is preserving freedom, preserving and upkeeping Europe as a beacon of light for people who want to, self-fulfill, want to prosper, want to, live a healthy, normal life, want to start a family, want to start a business. This is the mission statement that defense is dealing with. And we need to focus there, because if you get this right, then you got a lot of people who buys into that, who want to associate their careers with that, the investors who want to put their money there. And once you have this, success starts to generate success, as failure has generated failure in defense sector, I think, for the last couple of decades.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I guess we're supposed to sort of focus here on the dual-use aspect of it, so let's just unpack that a little bit. So first of all, the narrative that you talked about, I'm afraid, and it's good to be provocative on these stages, I think, and rather than reiterate the same stuff that you hear other places. I'm afraid that narrative is just so passé, and it has no real vision behind it. If defense's entire raison d'etre is to get into warfare, then effectively we're all in trouble. And that means if our own governments are thinking like that, or other governments, it doesn't really matter. That is a crazy proposition, I will say this to you. The proposition in defense surely has got to be to make sure that we minimize the risk of getting into conflict, or minimize the risk of conflict itself. And that means that we try as much as we can to ensure that we do not get into the situations of warfare and conflict in the first place. And when we do get into them, that we have the tools, the systems, and the advantage to be able to resolve those situations quickly and restore the current state back to peacetime. I think that is what most people in this audience would support. There might be a few of you who support the opposite. I won't ask you to put your hands up, but I'll be very worried about those people if they're in the room. So that, I think, is a very sensible narrative. And I think the dual-use proposition that we put out there effectively is a vehicle for that narrative. And it says the science and technology that we need to then invest in, which you heard about earlier on, is there to address both of those factors, bringing down the probability and bringing down the impact. And bringing down the impact does involve producing, the technologies and the equipment that might be used on the battlefront in the future. We know warfare isn't going to become extinct tomorrow night. That is also a pipe dream, that in fact there will be no wars tomorrow. That's not going to happen. We are going to have conflict, so we have to deal with that. And at the same time, we need to build resilient societies, societies that are prosperous, societies that show and demonstrate the strength of the liberal democratic model in the world. And through that process, we bring down the likelihood of the probability. And that is the reason why dual use is so important. It is, sometimes when I have this discussion, I have to talk about military versus civilian technologies. And this is actually, I see it as an incorrect way to frame the entire discussion. The point is that we need to direct our advanced technologies and our best minds into producing a safer and more secure world. And that is all of that combined together. You can't talk about one without the other. That would be my view anyway, yeah. But you might contend differently.
No, I think exactly the same. But I think the very self-centric view from defense is that we need dual use because, and I just had this thought when I was looking at you guys here. So what do you think is the difference between the defense conferences like this and then the startup or whatever how they market themselves in here? Here you see diversity. There's a lot of women here, a lot of young people. If it would be a defense conference, then it would be only 40 plus men in navy blue suits, only navy blue, I don't know what's with that, and brown shoes. I mean, that's like they come out from the same factory. And the way they think is that they only wake up in the morning when government puts a contract on the table. And the contract needs to be huge. Whereas here, and also in the sort of dual use or tech community, it's the other way around. It's not a government money that needs to be put on the table in the morning, it's the investor's money or your own money that you count pretty carefully. You need to make sure that whatever you commit your time, your money, well, it needs to work. Otherwise, you lose your money or you lose your resume or whatever, or you lose your time. So this is the thing that needs to change. And the other thing, I think the defense sector as a sort of customer has also been hidden away somewhere like outside of the sort of commercial market. We can order a Bolt, I mean the CEO of Bolt was on the table, and we can expect that they will come with the 3-meter accuracy. And if they don't, if they end up on the other side of the road, then we get angry. But if we want to employ a targeting system to shoot missiles with the accuracy of 5 meters, then we need to employ hundreds of millions of euros. How can it be? How can it be that in the commercial sector the same technology costs you nothing as a customer, but then the other end of the road, this is almost the impossible thing to employ and the impossible thing to do. So I think it's also the demand side in defense where the urgency, the customer focus is not fit. And I think the problem there is that there isn't enough free competition. The entry barriers are too high. And also I think the capital appreciation expectations are too low. So just people are not looking towards that. So everything that Deep is saying, in my mind, is just the sort of a portal door that will open this perspective to defense. Because in dual use, or the other side of the dual use, I mean, if there's military side of dual use and civilian side of dual use, then in civilian side all this exists. So we just want to create an environment where these two lend a hand to each other, and then we hope that maybe defense will change itself.
Kirsty, I was going to ask you, because as you were talking from the last panel, a question occurred to me. There's the demand side is a problem, generally speaking. Dual use helps to solve that, actually, because what it does, we talk about making sure we maximize the surface area of revenue opportunity for our startups, and dual use opens the aperture up so that they're not facing the risk of the long procurement time cycles that you classically see inside defense, or the low volume sales and all of that sort of stuff. But how do you see us solving the problem of the velocity around procurement in the classic defense domain, which we heard about, I think, in the last panel? Because I think that's a big problem that people have tried to solve for decades, and I wonder how we might succeed where others have failed. Let's put it that way.
Well, this answer is easy. Russians are going to solve it for us. Once the urgency hits in, then the solutions appear overnight. You see it in Ukraine, you see it everywhere. We saw it with COVID, for example. The pace of innovation in the times of urgency and demand gets very, very high. And the same happens in defense. The only problem we face with this as Estonians is that, well, we have directly our skin in the game for that, and that's going to be uncomfortable. But when it's uncomfortable, then I think the pace of innovation will be the highest. So I try to sort of put a sunshine on this statement, because I think there is. I mean, if we speak about the defense, then it cannot only be threat and things are going bad and we're going to have no future and everything is going to be destroyed. So no one wants to associate themselves with that. And that's why also our Prime Minister is speaking about the sort of bright side. That if you think of defense, it needs to be something that in the political mind of the people, and well, first of all, politicians, but it's a reflection of what people think. If you say defense investment, it cannot only be, oh, Russians are going to attack us. Because the most rational answer to that would be, okay, we'll move away. It needs to be something that is good for you, that exposes opportunity. You will have more jobs, more revenues, more technology, more exports. And through that, you build this deterrence element where we convince Russians that we actually employ so much fancy tech that we're actually able to wipe you off the earth first weekend if you try to do something. And we do it in collaboration with NATO. We do it in collaboration with the tech community. The tech community is super committed into this. The most civilian company that you can find, DePaul, their chairman and CEO is the biggest advocate for defense tech now. I mean, in essence, it's also already a deterrent element.
So and you guys have been a big supporter of how Diana is evolving. We also have, of course, the NATO Innovation Fund, which is a venture capital fund, which is trying to solve that issue of capital supply that we talked about as well. What is it that I guess you would have probably asked me this, but I'm going to ask you, what is it that you see that is different from a national perspective of what something like Diana is doing in the market and something like NATO Innovation Fund is achieving so far? And what would you think it could achieve in the coming years? What kind of velocity could it achieve?
Well, I don't know it really well, but my perception is that the capital appreciation expectations in defense or dual use are lower than in civilian technologies. In my mind, it's totally sort of, I don't understand this. For me, the revenue growth in some of the lethal capabilities, especially at the example of Ukraine, is huge. It's exponential. There are some capabilities on loitering or warhead-mounted UAVs or surveillance UAVs. It's exploded. Surveillance technologies, we sell them 1,000 times more than 3 years ago. I mean, it's exponential growth that doesn't exist in other sectors. And what it has done, it has exposed the sort of scale and mass to the industry that was very precise and very focused with very few customers before. So what happens with this? You push the price down, you commoditize, you are forced to standardize with this. if you're forced to standardize, then you will open up this sort of commercial off-the-shelf market for a lot of this stuff that was tailor-made before. And customers love it. Why? Well, it's usually 10 times cheaper. Of course, you want to buy something that you can get 10 times faster at the fraction of the cost, and it actually works. And then you don't need to, you need to put, I don't know, the 10 times more costly maintenance contract on top of that. But I also want to have one question from, I mean, you're from academy, from business, from VC. This is where you come from. So how come we have these conversations in 2024? Okay, we started a bit earlier, but where were we in 2010s, 2000s? I mean, how did we miss the opportunity in these 2 decades? Where were all these sort of bright people and bright academics?
So I'm actually recently in my career back in academia. So back then I was in government. So I ran a major part of the UK's counter-terrorism program. So I'm not one of the theoretical academics who hasn't necessarily done the job. I've done the job at the most pointy level. And then I went and started building startups. I worked in the startup space. I've felt the pain of trying to figure out whether I can meet salary the next month for myself, and even more worryingly for the people around you. So I know that pain very well. And I'm an academic and a technologist, so I work right at the heart of deep tech. I mean, I still have PhD students working on very advanced methods in machine learning. So I have some insight from all of those things based on what I'm going to say to you next. Mm-hmm. Because what I'm going to say to you next, had I not given you that context, would have sounded odd had I not told you that I can see it from the different perspectives. People were saying it. No one was listening. So the problem was, you had analysis to say the world is getting more complicated, it's getting more interrelated. You had analysis saying that we're looking at a situation where compartmentalizing things neatly into resilience and security and defense and creating an organizational structure that compartmentalizes the world no longer reflects how the world is actually wired together, and that we should be concerned about that the risks can propagate wildly inside these different situations, that cybersecurity will act as a force multiplier, that we will see a generation who last remember the use of nuclear weapons dying, and therefore the normalization of their use would start coming around about now. All of these things have been talked about, and actually quite often I would say from academic centers as well. But what you had was a reticence and a hesitation to think that longer term, and to only worry about the very next problem in front of you. And the issue with that is that you have no strategic thought in that frame, and we have to be very careful when we are facing extant situations of conflict to not overly focus on those and to look beyond those a bit and to figure out, okay, what is this teaching us about what we need to do next, not just for this. And so I'm always reminding people that we can talk about conflict X or Y. There is obviously this terrible, terrible situation happening in Ukraine. There is a horrible situation unfolding one way or another in the Middle East. But there are over 100 conflicts in the world right now. Mm-hmm. And these are kinetic, nasty conflicts. They kill people. They are born out of insecurity. And none of us can guarantee here tomorrow that 1 or 2 of those won't actually be the next one that we worry about in the next 6 or 7 years' time. They could get rapidly out of hand and suddenly be a problem that we should be thinking about. And that's, I think, the big difference in the last few decades, is that certain countries, particularly the wealthiest countries, or the most democratically instituted countries, quite often thought about the geographic proximity of the threat to them as being a way of measuring the risk that they should address first. But in a very, very interconnected world, in a hyper-complex kind of geopolitical environment, your threat or your enemy could emanate almost from anywhere around the globe. And I think it's this consciousness that we need to really be very aware of. I don't know if that's something, but that would be my rationale, and I think we're...
But then I will just confirm one last thing. I mean, there's an argument that the big pension funds and sovereign capital doesn't want to invest to defense because there are sort of moral issues. They have sort of put the defense into the same category as, I don't know, the pornography and other nasty things. So for these people who have been in the cutting edge of technology, has this been a moral issue, or is it just a lack of returns issue?
If you're very mercenary and dispassionate about the morality, there's a massive return on investment issue. Right? It's a bad business. If on top of that you do, however, care about how your capital is mobilized, a trend which, by the way, I believe is going to only increase in the decades to come, yes, there's a moral issue, and the moral issue has been that the way that defense narrative has been posed, as I said earlier on, if it is just framed as an enterprise to go to war, then of course I think this is something, as I hopefully explained earlier on, I don't think there's a logical narrative around that. That doesn't make any sense. And it certainly doesn't make sense when you say you want to create a better world through your defense apparatus. So once you move the narrative into a more sensible frame, and once I think governments and government leaders in democratic institutions are not tempted away from that narrative and stand strong to it, then I think what you'll start seeing is the movement of capital into those positions. And that's, again, why the dual-use proposition, I think, is so powerful. Yeah.
Well, I think these 6 large zeros indicate that we're out of time. So, Deep, I want to thank you, and thank you also to the audience and Latitude to inviting us here.
Thank you.